All right, it looks like we are live. What's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and we're back for another edition of Sunday Night Astrolive. And I'm so happy you all could make it and be here with the rest of us. So, hallelujah! It's Sunday night service, as it were. So, how is everyone? How are y'all doing out there? How are y'all doing in there? Peachy, how are you doing? You're in search of a lap. Which lap will you find tonight, Peachy? Anyway, we're here, and we are going to be talking tonight about a number of different things. If I have some time, I kind of want to break down the Zelensky, J.D. Vance dust up. Because that's really where it starts. It starts with Zelensky and J.D. Vance. If I have time, we'll get into that and we'll sort of break that down. I was watching a guy that does body language. He's a forensic psychologist, and he was going through all sort of the body posture and how that whole thing was breaking down. And I know that a lot of people think it was fake or staged, but the way that he was kind of breaking it down, you would have to be like, I know that Zelensky's an actor, but I don't think he's a very good actor. And I know that Trump has been in movies and has an IMDb page, and I think so does J.D. Vance, because there's this movie about him and his life. But they'd all have to be extremely good actors to pull off the body language stuff, which is what I'm saying. And I don't think that they're that great as far as actors go. But we're going to be talking about a great actor tonight. You can use your own judgment, and everybody has a take on that. I think that at some point the exchange between Vance and Zelensky might have been planned, but Zelensky was being a dick. He was being a dick, and he was trying to adjudicate his case in front of everybody. And so, yeah, thus it began. So if we have time, I'll see if I can dial up their charts, and we can have a look at that. However, we are going to talk about a famous actor tonight, and that is Gene Hackman, whose life ended on a rather somber, if somewhat perhaps suspicious note recently. And I'm not really going to go into his death, although the timing around it is really fascinating, which I'll show you astrologically, because we're going to kind of get into his chart a little bit. And we're actually going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the movie The Poseidon Adventure, which was released in 1972. I believe it was the second of Irwin Allen's sort of great disaster movies of the 1970s. I believe the first one was Airport. But it's really the Poseidon Adventure that kind of seals the deal for the Irwin Allen franchise. And the reason why it seals the deal, meaning that he gets to make so many more movies, because that movie was incredibly popular and grossed millions and millions and millions at the box office, it's because of the performance of Gene Hackman. And we're going to talk about sort of the movie within the movie with the Poseidon Adventure and the astrological symbolism that's associated with that movie. It's very rich, and it actually really plays out in a lot of ways in Hackman's chart, and also this interesting phase shift that we began to experience on Thursday, Friday of last week, where we had the Balsamic Moon in Aquarius moving into Balsamic Pisces, and then, of course, the new moon, which took place on Friday, which was the same day that we had the little dust up in the White House. So that 48-hour cycle from Balsamic Aquarius to New Moon Pisces actually kind of gets played out in Gene Hackman's natal chart, which you will see. So there's something very interesting about the passing of Gene Hackman, which is, well, if we go back to the Poseidon Adventure, it's very, 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 very symbolic. The other thing that's interesting about Hackman, and I maybe, well, I'll bring it up when we talk about it, is another movie that is Piscean in nature, but quite different than the Poseidon Adventure. So we're gonna go into sort of Gene Hackman world tonight, but not just Hackman. There's a much bigger kind of message going on with the Poseidon Adventure, which we'll get into. So we're going to do that tonight. We'll look at where we are currently in the astrological cycle, where the luminaries are and all that stuff, which we usually do. And then yesterday we had a really great get together over on Zoom through locals, and man, we were on for almost 2.5 hours. And it was really rich. I mean, there was a lot of contributions from a lot of people, saw a lot of faces. It was great. And Chelsea Tantra came by, and she was really busting out some really juicy astrology. So she has, if you haven't been to her YouTube channel, check her out, Chelsea Tantra on YouTube. And she just launched a new video on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. And we kind of got into that yesterday with the group. And now I'm going to have Chelsea on. I probably won't have her on next Sunday night because I'm not sure there's going to be a show next Sunday night. But I'm thinking maybe the following Sunday, I'll get her on and we'll talk about her video, which is really fantastic. And we'll talk about more stuff as well. So, anyway, it was a great get together, and you can have some of that by signing up for locals. And there's a link in the description for the show. And that was an event for everyone on locals. And of course, if you want to be a supporting member and support this show, you can do that over there as well. So it doesn't cost anything to join. The link is in the description of the show. Another little bit of business, I think our buddy Chris has a 15% off sale right now at True Hemp Science. I think the newsletter went out, but let me just check here. Let me see if that's true. It might be on his website. I'm not sure if it's there, but I'm not sure. I don't see it here on the website. But he's got here. Let me just give you an eyeball on the website right here. I'll just run the banner while we're at the top of the show. So let's do this. Okay, so we're going to go into the truehempscience.com website, and it's got a 5-star rating. A 5-star rating. Do you know how hard it is to have a 5-star rating on Google? 139 reviews. It's not easy. All right, but that speaks to the product. Now, if you want to experience the wonders of CBD and all of Chris's really, really high quality products, go to truehempscience.com, type in 15MINS, that's 15MINS, and you will get a free goodie bag with your order. Okay. Now, normally I just talk about the product and how good it is and what you'll get if you use that code, which is kind of an order on top of the order. But today, as of and Friday, as I mentioned it, the CBD stores and dispensaries here in Texas are in the crosshairs, and there's something called SB3, and it's starting to make its way through the House here in Texas. And essentially, what they want to do, they being the people who are sponsoring SB3, and it's a lobby, and it's connected to people that are from out of state, and those people are connected to THC and not CBD, that they want to ban CBD with trace elements as THC products, which means that Chris and everybody else here in Texas that sells CBD and the variety of their products. So, if you look here, you're going to see little trace elements of THC, CBD, and CBG. So and here we have CBDA. So there's a lot going on. CBD plus CBN. Like, you don't necessarily need to know how these work, but if you want to, you can. You can always make an appointment here, and they'll break it all down for you. But if this SB3 passes, this product, no more. Strong terpenes, no more. So when you purchase something from True Hemp Science now, part of that money is going to go to the defense fund, where there are other CBD purveyors, people that develop it, sell it, etc. They have their own lobby, and so they're doing their best to go to the Texas, capital Texas, and make their case as to why CBD is important and why they need to stop messing with this SB3 stuff. So this is really critical for thousands of independent business people in Texas, because if SB3 passes, 95% of them will go out of business. And we're already living in a time where the economy is not as great as it could be. And people are kind of on the sort of the downstream effect of losing jobs now. So this would be really devastating for a lot of people in Texas. So when you buy the product, you know that a portion of it is going to go to this defense fund that they're working on to stop this. This is David and Goliath, okay? Chris and the CBD growers and mixers and purveyors, the shop owners, they're David. They are David because they are going up against a Leviathan here. So if you order these products, just know that some of that is going to go towards a lobby group, which is going to help Chris and all these other folks keep their lights on. So it's going to be challenging, very, very challenging. But if you like the product, and a lot of you do, please support them. And if you haven't tried it, here's a chance and an opportunity for you to get in, get some goodies with your product, and know that you're actually supporting somebody who is a Main Street business and is doing everything in his power to keep his doors open, like many other CBD people here in Texas. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. It's a word from our sponsor. So let me get into chat a little bit, and let me see how we're doing here on the numbers. We're around 200 people. That's cool. All right. Let me just go through a few of the late arrivals. There she is, right there, Chelsea Tantra. There's our gal. She was with us yesterday and really added a lot to our discussion. And I'm hoping in 2 weeks we will get her on the show, maybe at the start of Aries season, to kind of coincide with the Saturn-Neptune thing. And then, but you can go check that out now. You don't have to wait. You can check out her video now, and then we'll get her on the show. We'll talk more. Who else? Hey, it's MJ. What's up, MJ? Green Eye Crow. Claire, I hope you got my email. And you can email me back. Penny's here from Iowa. What's up? Thor by the door. My man, Steve. how does CBD have anything to do with this? CBD Chris is a sponsor of my show. He's a sponsor of my show, and they're trying to outlaw CBD here in Texas. Right? That's what it has to do with it. So I hope that that's clear. Let's see. California Contrarian, my man, what's happening? He was with us yesterday. Look at that. Chelsea picking up on some subs, and deservedly so. Peter Byone, I'm glad Trump really seems to want to avoid World War III. Europeans have lost their minds. Suicidal, actually. Well, Trump may want to avoid it, but we may have it as a result of it, because it really feels like the lines are being drawn now. Europe has lines that are drawn. So we'll see what happens there, Peter. The magic cat. If you don't like a law where you are, you can always go elsewhere. Yeah, but there are thousands of people here who are making a living off of CBD. It's like, yeah, where are they going? They're all just going to go to New Mexico, where they're dealing with the cartels. So yeah, if you don't like a law, I'm sure if you want to get an abortion and you're in Texas, you don't like it, you want to go to California, yeah, I look, I'm with you on that. But it's not just like if you don't like a law, we're talking about people's livelihoods and the investment that they put in, and just getting stamped out by some corporate cartel creeps is something that we need to push back on. All right, I'll say no more. Let's see. We got deleted. We got Ojos Azules. Joe Licky. Thanks, Joe. I'm going to put that up there. Yeah, like and subscribe. I hope you'll enjoy the show tonight if you're new to the channel. And let's see, who else do we have here? Misbehaving too. Harry Bowie. Europe's military is thin. The next big war is going to be fought by drones. And eventually they'll bring the robots in. That's what I think. But before it happens, if there is a ground war, there will already be some other kind of war that they're putting into. It's like Sun Tzu. You don't go into battle. Like when you go into battle, you're kind of already losing the war, right? And most of the people who are hip to this know that. Okay. Well, why don't we jump into the show here? Let's do this. We're going to look at our guy here, Gene Hackman, because he's going to be our point of departure for our show tonight. And then we'll get into a bunch of other stuff. So if you haven't heard the news, Gene Hackman passed away probably about 3 weeks ago now. And they were living in New Mexico. And it looks like the timeline has changed here. Let's just go through this. This is all new. Let's see what it says. USA Today. Okay. So what's really interesting is that Hackman hadn't been seen for a long time. And I think maybe about a month and a half ago, he was spotted in public. So just before this happened, well, not just before, but not long before, he was kind of out and about, right? Kind of out and about. Okay. So his last event recorded more than a week before. Right. I think that's when they saw him. That was about the right time. Now, that was his wife. And Gene Hackman had really gotten into restoring properties. That was a big thing for him. And I think his house in Santa Fe was featured in Architectural Digest. Like he was very good at that. And I think his wife was a designer. So if you're a little squeamish here, and you may want to just turn the other way because I'm going to talk about the conditions. A deputy observed body decomposition, bloating in her face. This is his wife, Betsy, and mummification in Arakawa's hands and feet. One of the couple's German shepherds was found dead less than 15 feet from Arakawa in a closet, while their other 2 dogs were found alive in the bathroom near Arakawa and outside. Like, I'm not sure how the dog gets in the closet. Authorities called the deaths. Now they're suspicious. Mendoza told Today that it would be a challenge crafting the timeline of their deaths, as Hackman and Arakawa were private individuals and a private family. But when you see Gene Hackman's chart, you'll know why he was a private individual. You'll understand it. One of the things is in my investigation, we try to piece the timeline together. Mendoza said they usually work from when the event happened and go forward, but said that investigators plan also to work backwards on the Hackman case. 2 cell phones were among items found in a search of the Hackman home. Mendoza said that investigators would attempt to access the phones to gain insight into the last days of the couple. We'll be analyzing cell phone data, phone calls, text messages, events, photos in the cell phone, trying to piece a timeline together. So one of the things that this is all new. This is very new, because before this, they were not considered to be suspicious deaths. But this was posted not long ago. So that has apparently changed. And many of you are familiar with Randy Quaid and his whole star whackers theory. And that, in fact, he and his wife supposedly had to flee the United States to Canada because he felt like his life was being threatened. And if you understand the star whacker theory, according to Randy Quaid, what happens is that these people, let's say Gene Hackman was killed under suspicious circumstances, and it fits Randy Quaid's star whacker profile. The idea is that Gene Hackman would have a tremendous amount of assets, which I believe he did. I think they owned a number of homes. Maybe they sold some of them as he got older, but he would have a tremendous amount of assets. Now, I think he has children from a previous wife, and there's like 2 or 3. But when you get into the entertainment world, and I promise we'll get to the astrology here soon, but when you get into the entertainment world, what happens is that you are connected to your content. So if you're an actor or you're a musician, you are going to be getting checks, generally speaking, for the things that you had done while you were living. So if you're a musician, you'll get royalty checks, ASCAP, BMI, whatever you're connected to with content will come in. And it's the same with somebody like Gene Hackman, who would be getting money from things like either the sale of DVDs or the streaming of his movies. If he's connected in any way, shape, or form to any of that content, it does go to him, right? It may be fractional, but it still goes to him. So he is still connected to a lot of the material that he did. And there tends to be a kind of a residual relationship with that. So even beyond that, there are other assets in their portfolio, which, if not fully secured, can come under the scalpel of lawyers, litigators, estate people, right, who will go in and disassemble. So this is what Randy Quaid is talking about. And that now Gene Hackman was old. I mean, he was 95 years old. His wife was a bit younger than he was. So you would say, well, okay, well, he was old, and I guess it's his time to go. And maybe if you're a star whacker, that's what you want people to think. And I don't know. I don't know if there's any truth to it. I don't think there's no connection with Gene Hackman and Epstein on the surface. But symbolically, there is a very weird connection, which is right in the name, Gene Hackman, right? And what was Epstein? By the way, Epstein is an Aquarian like Gene Hackman. What was Epstein doing in New Mexico on his ranch with Ghislaine Maxwell and his little team of scientists? They were into genetics, right? They were into genetics in a big way. And there's this really crazy idea, right? That Jeffrey Epstein wanted to sort of recreate himself in all of these life forms that would be born, whether it was IVF or who knows, right? But there was that side of the whole Epstein thing going on in New Mexico. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were playing with the CRISPR technology and doing all that shit, because why not? Why not? You got all this money and you can sort of fuck around and literally and figuratively find out, right? So we have this interesting connection that Epstein in his branch there, not his home in Florida, not the apartment or townhome or whatever in New York. No, in the ranch in New Mexico, that's what was going on. He was literally the man that was hacking genes in New Mexico. And ironically, Gene Hackman was also living in New Mexico. Now, Santa Fe is a far cry from where Epstein had his ranch, but again, it's kind of interesting and strange at the same time. So Gene Hackman's death, for me, is one of those kinds of mythopoetic astrosync moments where these realities begin to bleed into our own. And, different people have different, kinds of takes on what I'm talking about. So you have people that are, deeply embedded in gematria, and they'll look at the numbers, right? Well, here's this number and how many amounts of days it took between this one and this place and this, and it's crazy, right? It's really, really crazy. Some of the gematria people are just like, wow, that's really insane. How did the fuck did you figure that out, right? So there's that in the gematria world. Then you have somebody like Christopher Knowles, who kind of has his version of synchro mysticism and dealing with things like the Watchers, or what's her name, Elizabeth Fraser from the Cocteau Twins, who's like this sort of mermaid muse. He's got his own kind of lattice work of decoding reality based on a lot of the stuff that goes through his world. Where for me, it tends to be astrological. And so the bleed through of astrology, and in this case, with the Poseidon Adventure in cinema and timing as to where we are, I think is really, well, I hope you find it interesting. It's interesting to me, or else I wouldn't be doing it here tonight. So this is where we're going to go. And Gene Hackman is going to be our guide. He's going to be our guide. Gene Hackman is going to take us down the rabbit hole here. So why don't we take a look at his chart, just so you guys kind of have an astrological understanding of Gene Hackman's chart. We'll throw in some transits here too, which might be helpful for us to understand what the hell might have gone on in his life. So we're going to go here, 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 and we're going to go down here. All right. Okay. Let's bring up his chart. Another interesting thing. Well, I'll get to it in a bit. I have to save it. I got to time it right. Timing is everything. Am I right? It's fucking everything. Okay. Okay, here we go. Here we go. So this is Gene Hackman's chart. He was born in San Bernardino, but he actually grew up in a small town in Illinois, which actually produced some pretty interesting people. One of whom I think was Dick Cheney, actually. Not that he has anything to do with Dick Cheney, but I also think Dick Cheney's another Aquarian. Anyway, Gene Hackman is an Aquarian. And he has a stellium. Not only just a stellium, he is a triple Aquarian. So his rising sign is 27, Aquarius. And there's his moon, there's his sun, there's his Venus, and he is a very 12th house person. I think it might have been about 3 months ago, maybe a bit longer. We did a, pun intended, deep dive into the 12th house. And so there are two things that emerge when you start to look at quote unquote famous people who are 12th house people. Number one, some of them can be very reclusive. Very, very reclusive. Gene Hackman's one of them. He's a very private guy, right? He was very, very private, and not everybody really got to hang out with Gene very much. There's a famous story where Ben Stiller did the entire movie of the Royal Tenenbaums with him. And Ben just like read his parts. When they were, on camera, they'd read their parts. And Gene Hackman was not a warm and fuzzy guy. Okay. Not a lot of warm and fuzzy. There's hardly any water in his chart. He's got Pluto. Right? That's it. South Node. That's it. So he wasn't necessarily known for being very accessible. So Ben Stiller basically shot the movie, and he really loved Gene Hackman in the Poseidon Adventure. And he just told him how much he loved it and how much it meant to him as an actor. And Hackman said, "Oh yeah, a work film." Right? So for Hackman, it was nothing. He was there to make money. But that gives you some kind of an idea as to how people just didn't really mess with him. He was not somebody that was like, on some level, he probably was somewhat accessible with the Aquarian ascendant. But another part of him was not accessible. And on sets, he could often, there are people, and when something like this happens, you go through a lot of different like forums where the story is being told or a certain movie's being kind of uncovered, and you'll read certain things every now and then comments. And there was this one comment which was, I happened to work on a movie with Gene. He didn't say what movie it was. And he said, he was less than pleasant as a person. And that, by the way, is not an uncommon remark. Gene Hackman didn't really care if you liked him, right? He didn't care if you liked him. But what he did care about was his acting. That was very important to him. So again, with the sun in the 12th house, a lot of times we really don't know who these people are. And especially as actors, we know them through their roles. And when they play a role, it's very archetypal. When I think of Gene Hackman, I think of Norman Dale from Hoosiers. I can't think of another coach in any sports movie except maybe Billy Bob Thornton in Friday Night Lights. And Billy Bob Thornton is a Sun 12th house person. Different sign, Leo, but Sun 12th house. Gene Hackman, Sun 12th house. And Billy Bob Thornton's portrayal of a Texas high school coach, he nails it. It's like, it's archetypal. You know, Denzel Washington was good in Remember the Titans, but I don't think he's Billy Bob Thornton good in Friday Night Lights. And there are other coaches, there are other actors who played coaches in basketball. Nick Nolte played a coach in Blue Chips. If I went through all my basketball, Gabe Kapler, or Gabe Kaplan, not Kapler, he's a baseball player. Gabe Kaplan played a coach in a basketball movie. It's a funny movie, it's a comedy, but nobody's going to remember that. No, who are people going to remember? They remember Gene Hackman as Norman Dale. Right? They're going to remember Gene Hackman as Eddie Doyle from The French Connection. They're going to remember him as that. Right? They're going to remember him as what's his name in The Unforgiven, the bad dude in The Unforgiven. So he's archetypal, and you get that with people who have a 12th house sun. Even something as kind of innocuous as Lex Luthor in Superman, that's an archetypal role. And Gene Hackman kind of yucked it up in that movie. So having a 12th house sun is, well, it is manifold, and it is filled with depth and at times even contradictions. But it's a very powerful placement. And I don't think Hackman, maybe over time this changed, but I don't think he ever felt really comfortable in kind of being on the earth plane in some ways. He has that square with Chiron and Taurus. Now, if you're looking at real estate, like that's a really interesting aspect for real estate. And so is Jupiter here. And he really got into properties, and he was flipping properties and making them high-end properties. True note, second house Taurus. Chiron takes something over, which wasn't as good as it was when you got into it, right? There you go. He had multiple residences, Jupiter, Gemini, and he's got a grand trine here. But I think it was the acting that allowed him to feel connected to the world. And what's interesting about Hackman and his relationship with acting is he winds up he goes into the army at 16, and I think he's in the Signal Corps and does stuff with radios and communication waves, right? Like Aquarius, of course. And he's in there for a while, and then he leaves and he comes out and he decides he wants to study, I think, journalism and communication. His father was a publisher of a local newspaper when he was growing up, and his parents got divorced, and that's a whole other story. But so that's what he starts off doing. Then eventually figures out, I want to become an actor. He gets this acting bug, right? And he starts off in LA, and it doesn't really go incredibly well. In fact, one of his friends in LA is Dustin Hoffman. And they're out there in LA together, and they're kind of these outsiders. And again, it doesn't really go incredibly well for him. So what he does, he moves to New York, and Hoffman goes with him. And he starts to do plays in Broadway. And that's where Gene Hackman starts to cut his teeth with acting. And eventually from there, he matriculates into some TV shows and a few movies. And the movie that really puts him on the map is Bonnie and Clyde. And he's in that with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. And he plays Clyde Barrow's buddy, and he's part of the gang. And I think it's like his maybe third movie, maybe fourth at the most. And he receives a nomination for Best Supporting Actor for the Academy Award. So Bonnie and Clyde really puts him on the map as an actor. And then things begin to take off from there. So it's interesting. Like and one of the things that he talks about as far as acting goes, and I think I could probably make a case for this chart, is that when he was in LA, people told him he would never be any good at it. And then he ran into somebody who I think was like a CO or somebody like that from the Army in New York. I think he was working this other job just so he could act. I forget where it was. Like it might have been a restaurant or some kind of service thing. And the CEO saw him and was kind of an asshole and basically told him, you'll never amount to anything. And when you read interviews with Gene Hackman, this actually burned him. This was his flame, right? He did not want anybody to tell him what he was capable of or not. So at that point forward, he became obsessed with being an actor. Where do we see that in the chart? We see it right here with Pluto. Right there in the fifth house, right? The fifth house is ruled by Leo. What do we know about Leos? Well, they like to act. They like to be on stage. So we have Pluto in the fifth house. And, wherever Pluto is in your chart, that's what you obsess about. That is what you obsess about. Wherever Pluto is, just think about it for a moment now. Line it up in your own chart, because I know where it is in my chart. I'll tell you, I obsess about it, right? But it's not really bad. Like when I talk about obsession, and especially as it relates to Pluto and or Scorpio, if we are not obsessed by something, this is me being a Scorpio rising, we're not obsessed by something, there's a very good chance we're not going to be very good at it. If we have a casual relationship with something, and I'm not talking about a person, by the way, that's different. But if you really, really wanted to immerse yourself into something, you would be obsessed by it. And you would learn every little thing about the thing that you're obsessed by. And eventually, that obsession would transform into a body of knowledge and a work that you would be able to ultimately practice or do. Or perhaps not even practice, but integrate into your life. Okay, that's the nature of Pluto. So he's going to have that here in the fifth house, again, which relates to acting. Now, if we see Mars, and we're talking about what might have happened, I don't know. We got some pretty sharp people here in the audience. What do you think? Transiting Mars on Gene Hackman's Pluto. Mars opposition, although wide, right? Interesting. In conjunct the sun, the moon. So there is a broken story about this. I'm going to go with foul play. With Mars crossing his Pluto. And you can say, well, it's a heart attack, but I don't know. You got that Mars opposition. And Mars is almost on the ingress, right, to the 12th house. Not only that, but you have the Pluto-Mars opposition. That's really where I was going with all of this, right? Like that would be Hackman's motivation, would be that Pluto-Mars opposition. Because Mars here is action. And in Capricorn, it's do whatever it takes. And he actually says that in an interview. As an actor, you'll do whatever it takes to get a role. And to me, that really speaks to Mars and Capricorn. in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't say he got kind of a late start. So he was born in 1930, right? And he doesn't really make it in kind of a big way until about 19. When does Bonnie and Clyde come out? 66, 67. So he's like 36, 37 years old by the time Bonnie and Clyde comes out. At the latest, he's filming it when he's 35. That's pretty late for an actor. A lot of times actors will come up and they'll start, hitting the silver screen in their early 20s. So you can even make a case here with all this Capricorn in Hackman's chart that he's going to get a late start. And he does. But he does not give up. And that's kind of the backstory of his acting life in a lot of ways. And I also think, with all that 11th house stuff, I think it'd be very difficult to be a part of a film crew with. Saturn in the 11th house could be very, like Ben Stiller. Like, he didn't talk to him. Like, he just did his lines until the end of the movie. He just, I'm going to go talk to Gene Hackman now. I mean, to me, that's like Saturn in the 11th house. And not a lot of friends either. Like, Saturn 11th house does not connect with the social sphere in a very big way. It's limiting, right? And I would also go as far as to say that Gene Hackman could also alienate his friends and get into either verbal or even physical altercations with his friends with Mars in the 11th house. So his social life, I think, was very, very complex. Now, he does have a grand trine if we bring Chiron into the mix, right? So we have Neptune at 2 Virgo, Chiron in the true node at 7-9 Taurus, and then let's bring Saturn in there. That is hard work, right? And again, I think Bonnie and Clyde started filming in 1965? Now, he did have an interesting relationship with Warren Beatty. They were friends. And he was in Reds with Warren Beatty as well. But yeah, so there's your Saturn-Neptune trine. Right there, Neptune, of course, being creative. Saturn, hey, we're going to take our time being creative. And also, I think the Neptune trine with Chiron, especially as it relates to acting, probably allowed him to feel a bit more at home in this world in a lot of ways. If we look at the Aquarian stellium over here, he's got a Venus-Jupiter trine. He's got a Sun-Jupiter trine. And even, not quite. It's more outside. But these two, trining Jupiter in Gemini, he can be larger than life. Right? Gene Hackman had this ability to inhabit his characters with kind of a larger than life persona. I mean, even like a kind of a very mediocre sports movie called The Replacements with another 12th house sun person, Keanu Reeves. Hackman plays the coach of the team. There's your Saturn in the 11th house. And he's actually good at it, right? Gene Hackman had the ability to take a mediocre movie and make it much better, which we'll see with the Poseidon Adventure. I'll show you why. We have an intercepted house here with Pisces. So sometimes with Aquarius on the ascendant, people could be kind of open, right? Because that's the nature of Aquarius, but also not so open. Sometimes Aquarius on the ascendant can be rather cool and detached. And again, I do think he had a bit of a hard time being in this world with these Chiron squares. But it's acting ultimately that allows him to, I think, kind of ground and integrate, because he's got a lot of earth. That's not really the problem in this chart. And you would think that somebody who doesn't have a lot of water would be a lousy actor because you need emotion. Well, that's not true. You know, because if he needed to, Hackman could summon it up, right? So over here, he's got Venus sextile Uranus and the Sun sextile Uranus, and you know, he can be a bit radical. You know, Gene Hackman lived by his own rules, and we would see this, right? And even his relationships are quite different. When I say relation, I'm talking about his marriage and partner relationship. Like, if we said, oh, well, what about Warren Beatty? Well, I can name you at least 3 women that Warren Beatty was in a relationship with, easily. Or if I said Brad Pitt, if you said Brad Pitt, I can name you 3 women that Brad Pitt. But Gene Hackman? Question mark? Not many, right? Not off the tip of your tongue. And that's Venus in the 12th house. He's going to be very private, very, very private about his relationships. Very, very private. So getting back to the ascendant, right? So this is the soft middle here. And I do think that this is where the actor comes into play, with the part of fortune in Pisces. And he can literally drop down into it. And in a minute here, we're going to shift from his chart to another chart that he is very much connected to. And that is the chart of the Poseidon Adventure. So if you look at where we were on, I believe, Wednesday, we had the moon, which was balsamic in Aquarius, which put it literally right there, right there. And then Thursday, we move into new moon mode. And it's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's Thursday when we find out about the passing of Gene Hackman. So it almost, I mean, if you follow the moon, right, he has this, you know, kind of lunar return here, which is interesting. And then the moon transits into Pisces, and it's still, by the way, balsamic. But by the time it becomes new, we're aware of what's happened. We have found out that Gene Hackman has passed, and it literally plays out right in his chart, right? Sort of the secrecy of the 12th house and what we don't know, to the moon emerging into his first house, and all of a sudden, like, what the fuck? Right? So we can see that literally get played out in his chart vis-a-vis the moon. And I do think that Pisces is that soft spot in his chart, that soft middle in the first house, that when he would go into a part or into a role, this is where he would go, right here, right in here. And that's where his part of fortune is. Okay, so we're going to jump into the Poseidon Adventure. And it's a really, it's a very interesting story here about the Poseidon Adventure. So the Poseidon Adventure, as I mentioned before, was the second big time movie that Irwin Allen, the master of disaster, launched. The first one was Airport. And the Poseidon Adventure opened on the 13th of December in 1972. Now, usually what would happen is that in a place like New York City, that would be the first place that a matinee showing of the Poseidon Adventure would debut. It'd be during a matinee, right? And most matinees would be around, the earliest matinees would be around 11 o'clock in the morning. Like you could actually go to a theater at 11 a.m., especially in New York, and go see a movie. So I'm using 11 a.m. as our time here for the first showing of the Poseidon Adventure in the United States. Okay, so let's do this. You're going to see this. And I'm going to zoom in here. Okay. So I've got 11 a.m., December 13th, 1972. So what are we talking about with Poseidon? Poseidon is another name for Neptune. And what does Neptune rule? Of course, Neptune rules Pisces. So on the day that the Poseidon Adventure makes its cinematic debut, where is the moon? In Pisces, right there. And where is it? Right in Gene Hackman's first house. Bada bing. Okay. Now he said, well, that's nice, Robert. That's a nice little coincidence. Moon happens to be in Pisces in his first house. Let's go up to the ninth house. Let's go up to the ninth house in Gene Hackman's midheaven. That's Gene Hackman's midheaven right here. And what do you see? You see Neptune, right? You see Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces, conjuncting his midheaven. And you also have all of these very turgid planets over here. Mars in Scorpio, Ceres in Scorpio. What else do we have there? We got a little Venus in Scorpio as well. But I'm really looking at this Neptune conjunction with the midheaven, right? Neptune also rules cinema. Now, Gene Hackman's character in the Poseidon Adventure is, for all intents and purposes, he's a Catholic priest. Now, you wouldn't notice it by looking at him, but we're gonna go down that. We're gonna go down that aisle, right? So, what does Neptune also rule? It rules religion and mysticism, right? And his character in the movie, his name is Frank Scott, he's very heroic, right? He's kind of an alpha. And it's interesting that, again, at the time of the opening of the movie, we have Mars here up in the ninth house. And Mars is very heroic, very alpha-like. At the same time, as you'll see in the movie as well, there is a very emotional and feminine side to Gene Hackman in this movie. We'll get into it. I'll show you all the characters and all the players. And over here, guess what? We've got the true node conjuncting his Mercury right there. And Jupiter's in his 11th house. So this is actually kind of a big moment for him, even though for Hackman, he's like, yeah, this was just a money movie. But he literally saves the movie. Right? If there's no Gene Hackman in the Poseidon Adventure, and not just him, but the character he portrays and how he portrays it, this movie doesn't do as well. I'm telling you right now, he steals the show and he turns his character into kind of a very complicated and tortured soul. And you're going to get that with somebody who has a 12th house sun. So the fortuitous nature of the movie and the release is, I mean, look, you could release that movie 12 noon. Doesn't matter. That Neptune is still going to be conjunct Gene Hackman's midheaven. And it's within 4 degrees. This true node is still going to be in his 11th house. And it's going to be incredibly fortuitous with Mercury and Jupiter here. But it's the moon, right? The moon in Pisces. Pisces, the ruler of Neptune, aka Poseidon. And what's interesting here is the south node is on his Pluto, right? And he's able to draw something from this south node. And especially when we look over here across the chart, which is where we have Mars. And this is kind of a new beginning in a lot of ways for Hackman in terms of his career. But also in the movie, he is, how do I say this? He's dealing with this idea of Christianity and God. And he's tempting the fates. He is literally tempting the fates. And I may risk a copyright infringement here, but I'm gonna risk it anyway, because you'll see what I'm talking about. So there's something going on with Poseidon Adventure, which is, I wouldn't call it incredibly deep, but there are themes here that if you're not paying attention to them, astrologically, and also in some ways culturally, you are going to miss them. All right. So one of the things that I'm going to bring to your attention here is the cast of the Poseidon Adventure. And when you see this, you're going to say, how the fuck did they do that? All right. So keep in mind now that the premise of the movie is that there is this boat called the SS Poseidon, and it is the last journey of that boat. And the guy who is running the boat line, I think his name is Niarchos or something like that. So he's supposed to be kind of this Onassis-like character, and they are crossing the Atlantic. It is its last voyage, and they're headed to Greece. And then people are going to get off in Greece, and they're going to go their separate ways, right? So this is the last voyage. And when you think of that, that's very Piscean, right? Like that's it. It's like, when you get really old and you pull your ship into the nursing home, you pull into the nursing home dock in the 12th house. That's it. It's kind of your last voyage, right? So not only is the ship named after the god of the ocean, Poseidon, right? It's also crossing the ocean. It's crossing the Atlantic, and it's the last voyage. It is literally being put into the 12th house when it's all said and done. Now, what happens along the way? Well, they encounter a storm. They kind of weather the storm. But this guy who is running the ship, Niarchos, is too cheap, and he doesn't want to take on ballast. He wants to get that ship to Greece as fast as possible so they can retire it and start breaking it down and selling the metal and all the other shit that goes along with it, right? So he's on a timeline. And the captain of the ship is played by Leslie Nielsen. And he has a skirmish with him in the what should we call it? Not the cockpit, but where they're steering the ship, right? He has a skirmish with him, and he says we need to take on more water so that we won't be knocked around by these waves, right? And so he's kind of overruled by the guy who's running the ship. He says, well, I can replace you if you want. So then what happens? Well, it's New Year's Eve, and there is an earthquake that happens at sea. And a massive wave is going to hit the SS Titanic, okay? So when we think of a massive wave, what do we think of? We think of Aquarius, which is the wave bringer. So I think I have a picture here of the ship right here. So this is what it looks like right here. I'm going to show you that right there. So here's your Aquarian moment. Like, even though the wave doesn't descend, right? It doesn't descend from the heavens, but Aquarius is the wave bringer. when you look at the glyph of Aquarius, what do you see? You see waves, and this is the wave that is going to take this ship down, right? And when you are watching the movie, it goes right through here, right? Okay, so we're setting the stage. We're going to call this Pisces here, and we're going to call this Aquarius here. Yes, because it's a wave, and it is a destructive wave, which will flip the SS Poseidon upside down. All right, so let's take a look at the cast, because the cast has a lot of commonality. So here we go. Stella Stevens, Libra. Ernest Borgnine, Aquarius. Jack Albertson, Gemini. Shelley Winters, Leo. Red Buttons, Aquarius. Carol Lindley, Aquarius. Pamela Sue Martin, Capricorn. Eric Shea, Aquarius. Leslie Nielsen, Aquarius. Gene Hackman, Aquarius. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Aquarians. And that's not including a character that you'll see in a minute who plays a silent role. You see him in the movie. He's at a table with Pamela Sue Martin and Eric Shea. And he's also an Aquarius and also shares the same birthday as Carol Lindley. So Roddy McDowell is the only other main character I'm leaving out. And he happens to be a Gemini. I'm sorry, Virgo. So if we counted that other character, which you'll see in a minute, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters in the Poseidon Adventure who are all Aquarians. Now, when you look at Pamela Sue Martin's astrological chart, you'll see that she fits right in with Gene Hackman because she's a Capricorn. And she has all these Capricorn placements. And I don't know whether Hackman is faking this or not, or because he's just acting, but they have a palpable connection on the screen, right? She's young. She looks up to him. She kind of has a crush on him. And there's a very integral scene where she's helping him sort of navigate through the bowels of the ship. And they look at each other, and it's very powerful. Like, Hackman does not hold back in his acting at all in this movie. In fact, he basically takes this cast literally in the film because he's their leader, right? He's going to lead them through the bowels of the ship. And he takes the cast, or he takes these people, and he puts them on his back, literally on his back in this movie. And he puts the movie on his back. It's kind of an amazing sort of intersection between the actor and his role, and then what he's able to do. Anybody else, this movie would have sunk at the box office. But I think it's because Hackman, if you go back to his chart, he's got all those planets in the 12th house, which is a very kind of submerged, immersive environment in the chart, right? He's got that first house in Pisces, with Pisces in the first house. And he's got Mars in Capricorn in the 11th house, and this is a group, right? And he always does pretty well when he's in a team-oriented situation. He's almost always the leader of the team. Okay, but there's other themes here, and it's a Piscean theme that is really, really interesting. And ultimately, I'm going to bring you to this place. Just hang it here long enough. I'm going to bring you to this place where this movie is symbolic of where we are right now. And when you have somebody like Gene Hackman pass away, who has this great catalog of films, right? Great catalog of films. And then there's this one, and how the moon literally goes from Aquarius, Balsamic Aquarius, crosses his ascendant, and moves into the first house, posthumously, of course, it also represents this Aquarian, Piscean kind of disaster opera. And we're kind of in it now. And I'll show you how and why. Okay. So what I'm going to do, and again, I'm going to risk my copyright here. Let me talk about Hackman's character in the movie. I'm going to bring up another, see if I can bring another picture of him here. Okay. This is the one that I pulled out. So I'm going to share this tab right here. So Hackman's character in the movie is he plays a priest. So instead of, of course, a priest is what? Piscean, right? Piscean. It's religion, the fish hat, the Pope. But instead of wearing, right, the frock or whatever you want to call it, that a quote unquote regular priest would, he wears a turtleneck. So he's establishing that he is going to be a priest on his own terms. So in a lot of ways, he's very Aquarian. He's rebelling against the church itself. And the practice of his religious doctrine is very different than what the church is offering up. And there's a scene here with him and Arthur O'Connell, which gets into it. And this is the copyright that I'm gonna sort of risk here. And this is the Great Scott. This is the Great Scott speech here. So, and this is his connection with Arthur O'Connell. All right. So I'm going to play this, and I'm going to stop it along the way. But you're going to get a sense as to Gene Hackman's character and why it's important. So there's the Poseidon. Okay, so right here.
Pray to God for help.
Let me just stop you here. All right. So here he is. He's with Arthur O'Connell, and Arthur O'Connell is this old school Catholic priest. Now, take a look here. Hackman is not wearing the traditional frock or collar. I don't know what they're called, but he's going for this turtleneck. Okay. Now, Hackman has his own ideas about theology. And when you look at Pisces, what do you see with Pisces? You see two fish swimming in opposite directions. And Hackman's character is moving this way. He is moving away from the orthodoxy of the church. I'm told to change the speed on the clip. I can change it a little bit, but I've done it before and it hasn't really saved me. So I'll go a little faster. All right, so let's try it. So this is the clip, and he's going to make his case for his unorthodox theology. All right, so here we go.
Get down.
All right, I don't like this. Hold on. Sorry, timer's off. Here we go. Here we go. If I have to, they'll just make me remove it. That's all. I don't know. Let me refresh this. I'll be right back.
Get down on your knees and pray to God for help. And then maybe everything will work out fine. Garbage. Not where I come from. You could wear off your knees praying to God for heat in a cold water flat in February. And icicles would grow from your upraised palms. If you're freezing to death, you burn the furniture. You set fire to the building, but you get off your knees.
Somewhat unorthodox, wouldn't you say, Reverend Scott?
But realistic. John, you've got to use your church for something more positive than prayer.
If you deliver sermons like this, it's a wonder you're still an ordained minister. Or are you?
The best kind. Angry, rebellious, critical, a renegade. stripped of most of my so-called clerical powers.
Now, how Aquarian is that? Right. This is the sign of the man coming through. Shit, I wish I could make this bigger. Why does it fucking make bigger? Anyway, all right. Let's keep playing. Right. Here's your Pisces guys, man. They're going in opposite directions. They're swimming in opposite directions. Here we go.
But I'm still in business.
Well, you seem to be enjoying the punishment.
Punishment? The church has blessed me. That's what it's done. It's vanished to some new country in Africa. Hell, I had to look it up on the map to find out where I was going. Oh, my bishop doesn't know it, but he's given me exactly what I wanted. Elbow room. Freedom. Real freedom. Freedom to dump all the rules and all the trappings. And freedom to discover God in my own way.
Oh, well, I better be going. I'll see you later.
John, you still want me to give that guest sermon this afternoon?
Well, one thing's for sure. Nobody's going to sleep through it.
God is pretty busy. He's got a long-term plan for humanity that stretches far beyond our comprehension. So it's not reasonable to expect him to concern himself with the individual. The individual is important only to the extent of providing a creative link between the past and the future, and his children.
All right, that guy is an Aquarian, and he's born the same day as Carol Lindley. So I'm just keeping you updated. That's him. He doesn't make it, by the way.
Or in his grandchildren, or in the contribution he makes to humanity. Therefore, don't pray to God to solve your problems. Pray to that part of God within you. Have the guts to fight for yourself. God wants brave souls. He wants winners, not quitters. If you can't win, at least try to win.
There's Carol Lindley, who is an Aquarian. I think that might be Waddy Wachtel, who plays in the band, the New Year's Eve band. Who, by the way, Gary Wright, of Dreamweaver fame, he's in the band on New Year's Eve for the Poseidon Adventure.
God loves triers. Isn't that right, Robin?
Right.
So, what resolution should we make for the new year? Resolve to let God know that you have the guts and the will to do it alone. Resolve to fight for yourselves and for others and for those you love. And that part of God within you will be fighting with you all the way.
So what's happening here is that he is setting the stage for the movie, because he literally has to be that person to fight for everybody that's a part of his crew. He's setting the stage for all of it. But what you're really also seeing too is this kind of ecclesiastical debate, the orthodoxy of Arthur O'Connell and the old church, and then Frank Scott, portrayed by Gene Hackman, an Aquarian, and says, I'm going to discover God in my own way. And God doesn't like losers. God likes winners. The only thing about that speech, which is a little clunky, is God likes triers. Well, you know what Yoda said about people who try, right? So his character, there are two people that wrote the script for the movie, Sterling Silliphant and the director, I think his last name is Near, Neare. So they both wrote the script. It's a clunky script, but the director was kind of in this sort of new age phase in his life, right? So he actually gets to work out some of these unorthodox philosophies that are put together by Gene Hackman in the movie. So we have Arthur O'Connell, who is the fish swimming in one direction, and Gene Hackman, the other cleric, the fish swimming in a different direction. And again, it's all at sea. right? And it's all on the SS Poseidon, who is the god of the oceanic underworld. And then what takes place next is this New Year's Eve party where everything goes to hell. It's when the wave hits. Let me see if I can just give you a quick little visual of New Year's Eve. Oh, before I do that, let me go back here, and I'm going to just go through the cast slightly, and I'm going to give you like their breakdown and who they are and why they're important in the movie. So here we have Pamela Sue Martin, and this is her little brother, played by Eric Shea, who was kind of a well-known child actor at that time. Pamela Sue Martin would go on to star in the Nancy Drew Mysteries on ABC. Didn't really make it in a big way as an actress, but maybe that's not a bad thing, right? So she is their brother's sister. Carol Lindley plays the singer of the band. And the Poseidon Adventure won 2 Oscars. One was for special effects, and the other was for best song. And There's Got to Be a Morning After by Maureen McGovern. And Carol Lindley lip syncs it in the song, right? So she's a member of the band, and her brother gets killed when everything flips over, right? So she's traumatized throughout the entire journey. Red Buttons plays a single man who is lonely and doesn't have anybody in his life, right? He also happens to be Jewish in the movie. And he eventually finds purpose by making sure that Carol Lindley, who is completely traumatized, makes it to the very end. So his character arc is kind of lonely guy, kind of quirky, doesn't have anybody in his life, and would love to have somebody in his life. And now he's got his perfect MK Ultra wife to be in Carol Lindley. No, that's a little unfair. But in that moment, he has found purpose by doing something that a man would do for his wife. He protects her the entire time. Her character arc is one where she falls in love with Gene Hackman, although it's never really spoken, but you can tell, like, big time man crush on Gene Hackman. So her character arc doesn't change very little, except there's kind of more of an intense connection between them at a certain point in the movie. He's just a smart alecky little kid who knows too much. His character arc doesn't really change. Now we get into Shelley Winters and Jack Albertson. They are Jewish, and they are headed to Israel to go visit their grandson that they have never seen before. And Shelley Winters has like what is it, the glyph for life, right? It's the Hebrew glyph. It's I forget the name of it, but it's the glyph for life. It's around her chest. And there's this thing where she keeps wanting to give it to Jack Albertson to make sure that their grandson, whom they've never seen, will be able to get this. But he keeps giving it back to her, right? And so their character together, their character arc is that they're this couple, this old Jewish couple, and they love each other. And they're going to go to Israel to go see this grandkid. And through the movie, there's something very interesting here. There's this other subtext that is going on between, in some ways, Judaism and Christianity, which, again, I'll get into in a moment here. And even to some degree, there's this sub-narrative around the Holocaust in this movie. Again, these are all themes, right? They're all themes that show up with Pisces and Aquarius. Aquarius being rebellious, Pisces being passive to a large extent and going along with the status quo. So Shelley Winters' character arc is that at a certain point, she is going to sacrifice herself for the entire group, which I'll get into in a minute. Leslie Nielsen doesn't stay around for very long, right? Once that wave hits, he's done. He's done. He meets it literally head on. But I put him in here because he's a part of the movie and he's also an Aquarian. Roddy McDowall's character, he's not really important. He's a bartender. So for Virgo, that's a perfect occupation. But he does help them scale the Christmas tree. And I'll get into the Christmas tree in a minute. So that they can get out of the ballroom and begin to make their journey towards the rear of the boat. Okay. So he's not in it very much. Now, these two are interesting. Like, I think of all the people besides Gene Hackman, the characters here between Ernest Borgnine and Stella Stevens, I think are kind of fascinating. It's a little hackneyed, but fascinating. And so their story is that he was a detective in the New York PD and she was a prostitute, right? And what he does is he arrests her because he doesn't want to see her on the streets, right? And eventually he arrests her enough so that he takes her off the street and they become man and wife, right? So he's a cop who marries a hooker and she kind of looks the part a little bit, right? And there's this really weird scene in the movie where she's afraid to go out and mingle amongst the people on the ship because she thinks that there was a guy that she noticed on the ship that she turned a trick with. And you can see, I mean, it's kind of far-fetched, right? It's like part of this weird plot, but you can see how it affects Ernest Borgnine. And then he goes, and she kind of browbeats him a lot, but he's like, he says, I don't care. Like, I don't care about any of that. You know, I just love you, right? And so they kind of turn this corner when he's like, that doesn't bother me. That doesn't shame me. Now, the dynamic tension between Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine is kind of palpable because Borgnine is also kind of this alpha male, right? He's a cop and he's a guy that wants to get things done and get things done now. Gene Hackman is taking these people, right? He is literally their savior. He is their savior because he is going to take them and lead them through the bowels of the ship, and he will deliver them to the promised land. And the promised land is the engine room. But along the way, he and Ernest Borgnine really butt heads, right? It's actually kind of an interesting part of the movie. So these are the characters, and the character arcs are the ones who go through the greatest changes really are Shelley Winters. Hackman's character arc is there, and he's at like a 9, and he goes to about a 10. Like every scene he's in, he completely eats it up, right? And then her character arc, kind of tragic, actually. So we were watching this last night, right? And keep in mind, she was a hooker. And I'm gonna, spoiler alert, like there's a part of the movie where there's this explosion that happens inside the ship, and she winds up dropping into what looks, for all intents and purposes, a lake of fire, right? It's like I cracked and look, she's now in the eternal lake of hell because she was a prostitute, right? I mean, it's, you could make that connection maybe a little bit if you're paying attention. She could have died any other way, right? She could have had like a big piece of pipe hit her on the head. It could have knocked her out. Oh no, she gets unmoored blown off the stairs that she's in, and literally falls into this lake of, it's like water inside the ship, but there's fire all around. They do a really great job of like portraying the bowels of the ship as hell. That's really what they're doing, right? And it's kind of like a sort of a Dante moment where Gene Hackman is leading them literally out of the bowels of hell into like this promised land position. Again, all very Piscean in a lot of ways. So let me show you a few of these images that kind of go along with this. All right. This is, let me see here. Let me give you an example of the New Year's Eve image. Hold on here. So let me see if I can find it. That's not it. Let's see. It's not it. Hold on. That's the Christmas tree. Let's just do this. I'm just going to do New Year's Eve Poseidon, and I'll show you the image here. Hold on one second. Because that's where all the action takes place, right? It's where it starts. New Year's Eve, Poseidon. All right, right here. So I'll just go through some of these images really quickly. So they sing Old Lang Syne, and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. And you can see here's Jack Albertson and Shelley Winters and Red Buttons. They're all at the same table, right? Here's Gene Hackman at his table. He's actually with Ernest Borgnine and Stella Stevens. And here they are. They're toasting on New Year's Eve. Happy New Year's, right? And here's the band. There's Carol Lindley, Morning After. Gene Hackman, like they're cheering, right? Everything. He's very charismatic, right? Gene Hackman is incredibly charismatic in this movie, right? And Borgnine's always over the top. And then all of a sudden the wave hits, right? And now they're in trouble. Everything starts to tilt, and then it starts to flip upside down. And this is where all this shit happens. Is that, pre-CGI, like they totally make this thing really work. Like you feel like you're in the ship and it's literally flipping upside down, right? So here's Stella Stevens. And this is interesting because they're toasting, right? They're toasting, and Gene Hackman says, "A toast to love." Right, a toast to love. And when she hears that, she's like, "Ooh, I like that." Right? She's very, very into it. Right. So there's Poseidon right here, and there they are. There's the captain. That's Nyarchos. He's the bad dude. So Leslie Nielsen's going to have to retire and go to the deck. And this is when the wave hits. Right, and these are some more images. Oh, that's not from that. That's from Godfather. Those are New Year's films. So this is where all the havoc ensues. It's on New Year's Eve. Okay, so then what happens is that a group of people, the group that I just showed you, is kind of magnetized, literally magnetized by the Gene Hackman character who is going to lead them. He takes charge. Right? This is him getting a chance to put his gospel into action. Like he's part pastor and he's part General Patton here. And then there's another group of people who are there, and they're sort of down below. Like they're sort of down below, because what they do is they take this Christmas tree, which has fallen, this massive Christmas tree. And then they use this Christmas tree to basically get up from the bottom of the ballroom on the ship. And I'll show you this right here. They get up from the ballroom of the ship, and they're able to scale this Christmas tree. And this is where they're going to start their journey. Here's Roddy McDowell, the bartender, and he's securing the Christmas tree. So it's, again, as a symbol, like the Christmas tree is sort of this, it's this pagan symbol, and it literally is fallen from the place where it was when it was attached to the floor, and now they're actually on the roof, right? So they use this Christmas tree as a ladder to ascend to like this part of the ship. There's a group of people and there's a purser, and they're down below, and Gene Hackman's character, Frank Scott, Reverend Scott, is trying to get them to come along, right? And then he actually has an encounter with the other priest, played by Arthur O'Connell, who stays. Again, two fish swimming in opposite directions. Now, what's interesting here is I think that there is a Holocaust theme to that scene, right? Because you have a group of people who are going to wait around, and somebody's going to come for them, and somebody's going to save them, right? There's also this idea that God will intervene and God will save them. And that's personified by the Arthur O'Donnell character. So they're not moving, right? They're gonna be there. They're gonna sit tight. And this other group is going to ascend the Christmas tree, and they're going to start their journey towards the engine room of the ship, right? So there's and the only reason why I believe there's a Holocaust theme in here, which again is like very, whatever you believe about the Holocaust, right? It's very sacrificial. And who are the people that make it out of that group of people who won't leave? Shelley Winters, Jack Albertson, Red Buttons. In this movie, they are all Jewish. So they like, if you could say, hey, you want to stay in the camp or do you want to leave? All you got to do is, make a little effort. So there's this very interesting undercurrent. Again, we're dealing with not just, hey, a ship is flipped over and we're going to just, turn this into a disaster. No, there are these themes here, and the themes are Piscean and Aquarian, and how they commingle together, and ultimately you'll see what happens here. I know a lot of you have seen the movie. So they start their journey once they get everybody out of there, right? They start their journey and they go to the thinnest part of the ship, which of course the little brainiac, 10-year-old or whatever is, played by Eric Shea, the Aquarian, he knows the ship. He's seen the blueprints. He knows it inside and out. He knows how to get there, right? So he knows that there's only an inch of steel at the engine where the propellers are, and that's where they decide to go, right? So that whole journey is fraught with catastrophe. And along the way, their faith is shaken, right? And there's a battle between the Gene Hackman character or the Ernest Borgnine character, because they encounter another party who are going to the front of the ship. And again, this is very Piscean, right? You have one group going this way and another group going this way, and again, because they're underwater, literally underwater, they're the symbol of two fish swimming in opposite directions. So Ernest Borgnine, who is this man of action, he's a cop, right? He's a man of action. He's a cop, and he wants to go with them. But Gene Hackman keeps putting them off because there's a different way to go. Okay, so eventually Gene Hackman goes ahead and he finds this one area where he's found the room. He's found where they need to go. Gene Hackman has been to the promised land, right? And he was there with Pamela Sue Martin, and they have this very intense embrace with each other. And it's because she's so scared, but she also has an incredible amount of like belief and faith in him, right? So it's very, very emotional scene between the two. Now he goes back and then he finds out that water has leaked into the space. And it's not a good thing. So he's got to take a rope and he's got to go in and he's got to swim, and it's about 30 seconds worth of oxygen. And when he gets to the other side, he's going to pull this rope and they're going to know he's there, and then they're going to send other people down into this water where they're going to see Gene Hackman, and it's going to be right the final stage of their journey. Okay, so again, in a Piscean setting, Hackman has to go under the water, right? He's got to go under the water. He's got this rope. He's going to get to the other side, and then he's going to bring them through. He's literally going to resurrect them. But what happens is that part of the ship lands on top of Gene Hackman, and the rope is slack. So Shelley Winters was a swimmer when she was young, okay? And she is now going to save Gene Hackman because there's a slack rope, right? And what she does is she takes the symbol of life and gives it to Jack Albertson, and then she goes down into the water. And let me show you a little Shelley Winters visual. Again, we're talking Pisces here. There she is, right? She's headed towards Gene Hackman in this aquatic scene, right? She's going to try to free him. And so she encounters him, and she has to move this piece of metal, which has fallen on top of Gene Hackman. Now, this is really kind of an interesting scene in of itself, right? Because if Gene Hackman is a priest, theoretically, what is he an extension of? Well, Peter, who starts the church, but Peter is one of the apostles, right, who is there. I think Peter's later. Peter's a bit later, but he's an apostle, and he's following in the life of, no, he's there, isn't he? Because Peter denies. Anyway, I got Peter and Paul mixed up. But what happens with Jesus, right, is that he is resurrected. He's resurrected after he comes off the cross. But there's also the boulder, right? The boulder of the cave where he's buried, and then they roll away the stone and he's not there. This is the boulder right here. This is the boulder. And you have Shelley Winters coming in to pull it away, right? So what happens to Shelley Winters as a result of all of this? Well, Shelley Winters, she doesn't make it. She does not make it. She has a heart attack and she dies. Now here, when you look at this scene, this is after her, she's freed him, and the two of them are together, and they are kind of alive at this point. But what's interesting here, thematically, is that Shelley Winters, again, she's Jewish, right? She is Jewish. And what does she do? She sacrifices herself for this character who represents Jesus, who sacrificed himself for all these other people, right? So it's like when you get into the Poseidon Adventure, you're in the upside down world because they're headed to the back of the boat, not the front. And when you look at this picture here, Shelley Winters almost appears to be like a Christ-like figure. Like, look at her. This almost looks like a cross, right? In the background, you have all of these crosses as well. So Gene Hackman has a very emotional scene here, and he's crying out to God, not this woman, not this woman. And now he becomes angry at God, right? He's like basically shaking his fist, and he's telling God, like, fuck you. Like, you can't just get us out of here. You have to make us go through all of these trials and these travails and these tests. And he says, you know what? Go ahead. Bring it on. I'm ready for more. Okay. So it's after this scene that Hackman has this kind of defiant moment with God, right? But look at this. I mean, this is clearly, staging Shelley Winters as the Christian figure, not Gene Hackman. Hackman will do this, by the way. He will do this, but she sacrifices her life for his. So again, we're into this Piscean world, right? Sacrifice, scapegoats, martyrs. And now Hackman has to continue this journey with the rest of the people. So eventually they come to this place where they're right there, and they are at the final part where this door is going to lead them into the engine room, and they are going to ultimately be rescued. However, a steam vent has opened up and is blocking their way. And this is where Gene Hackman shakes his fist at God, right? And he is challenging God to a duel. And the duel is his life for the others. So what Hackman does here is he's using the wheel, right? And he's turning the wheel spoke by spoke to close this steam vent. And the steam vent is incredibly hot, right? So literally Hackman, this is his moment of the cross. We already had Shelley Winters sacrifice herself, right? And her, the trip to Israel and her grandkid, right? For Gene Hackman and everybody else. So now it's Hackman's turn to sacrifice himself for the others. And this is what happens. And he gets this done, and he shuts it down, and he can no longer hold on to this wheel. So he is released from the wheel of judgment and the wheel of suffering, and he plummets into the very hot water that is awaiting him below. So what's interesting is that his fate, in some ways, is similar to the same fate of what? The prostitute, right? And who is the prostitute in Jesus's world? Mary Magdalene, right? And who is the mother? Mother Mary. And who does Shelley Winters kind of portray a little bit here? She portrays the Mary role a little bit, right? So we have all these religious undertones with the Poseidon Adventure. And then the final piece of this is the sacrifice of Reverend Scott. So who makes it? Eric Shea, Pamela Sue Martin, Red Buttons, Carol Lindley, Jack Albertson, and Ernest Borgnine. They're the only ones that make it. So the ones who pass along the way are Stella Stevens, Roddy McDowell, Shelley Winters, and Gene Hackman. And then the other 5 make it. So they go to the engine room, right? And the engine room is kind of close to the water line, and they start clanging because they can hear something. And they start clanging, and then there's clanging back, and then they cut a hole into the top of the engine room, and then they are literally resurrected. Right. And this is, I'm sorry, spoiler alert, but this is how it goes. None of it happens without Gene Hackman's character. And it's his fiery, God is not going to help you unless you help yourselves. Right? Unless you throw yourself into the act of living. And he brings this up again and again through the movie. And this is what Red Buttons here is. Red Buttons here is, he knows that he's just been on the sidelines of life. Right? And each one of them in some ways has to commit to this act of living. Right? Like Ernest Borgnine is going to have to live on without his beautiful ex-hooker wife, played by Stella Stevens. Right? He's going to have to live with that. Right? Jack Albertson is going to have to live with the grief of not having Shelley Winters around. But they all have shown, like Jack Albertson almost checked out. Both he and Ernest Borgnine, when their wives die, they both nearly stop. They don't want to go on, but they do. They go on. They make it to the engine room because it's an affirmation of life. Right? Carol Lindley, whose brains are kind of scrambled. Well, she doesn't really she makes it, but it's because of Red Buttons. But there's a point where she has to choose, and she does. And of course, the kids make it well because they're the kids and they're the future. But this is a really fascinating movie on so many levels, right? From Gene Hackman's literal portrayal of an unorthodox, rebellious Aquarian priest to this idea that this vessel is overturned, and the way out of the vessel is not the way that you would expect. And this is where we come to the meta of the Poseidon Adventure, right? We're in the meta territory now. So what do we talk about with our world at times? It feels like everything is what? Upside down. If you go into Stranger Things, well, I really like season 1 of Stranger Things. Season 2 wasn't bad, but after that, I stopped watching. But what do they talk about with Stranger Things? They talk about the upside down. And it was almost as if on timing or on time when Stranger Things began to air, that our reality began to look very inverted, that it appeared to be everything was upside down, right? The world that most of us, not all of us, but most of us had experienced, through the character arc of our own lives, was not working anymore, right? The things that we had come to count on weren't the things that they were prior to a certain point in time. I'll give you an example. So let's talk about the NFL. For a lot of dudes, the NFL sports, keep politics the fuck out. We're just going to watch our sports and we're not going to deal with politics. And this is the last bastion where we can just hang out and tune out and take this in. And then what happens? Well, you have Colin Kaepernick, Black Lives Matter, taking the knee, and then all of a sudden sports aren't that sort of hermetically sealed space anymore. It's been flooded by the Cultural Revolution. So we look at that and we go, well, what's happening here? What is happening? And then the other part of that is that, well, sports was this area where you could get people who were black and people who were white and people who were from one side of the tracks and people who came from better homes, people from single families, people from good families. You get them on a team and they had to work together on a team. That was the whole idea behind sports. At the end of the day, it didn't matter ultimately where you came from. It was about what you could do for your teammates and your team, right? This is what my experience was playing sports in the 70s. And that's what sports was about. But then all of a sudden, that wasn't important. And it was like, what was more important was somebody else's story and how they got there and why it's really important and why it might be more important than somebody else's story, right? And that's like, that wasn't what sports was about. And so that's what I'm getting at here is like, it became inverted, right? What was important with sports in its purest sense was the team. And if you were good on the team, great. If you weren't so good on the team, you were still part of the team. And at a certain point, you had to step up and be a part of the team, right? You had to figure out how to work together, how to play together. Like it was all part of it. And then this other thing comes along and it's like, it's not a team thing anymore. It's like there are special interests inside the team that are more important than the team. And that's just one version of it, right? There's plenty of others. So all of a sudden now, oh, well, men can have babies? When did that happen? This is what I'm talking about. You guys know what I'm talking about. I could sit here and quote chapter and verse on this all night long. And we wake up and we're strangers in a strange land. And this is what's happened. We become strangers in a strange land. Who are these people? How did they get here? What am I doing here? Where's the meaning in my life now? Because if I define it upon the world that was, which was not inverted, not part of the upside down, well, that world kind of made sense, but this world makes no sense at all. Okay, so what I'm positing is that the Poseidon is the model for our life, right? It is the SS Poseidon is the model for our life because everything on that ship is upside down. And you can't get to the point where you will be liberated by going in the direction that you theoretically should go. Because there's that group of people who are going to the bow, but the bow is underwater. Like in their minds, that's where they need to go. No, you have to go in the other direction. It's, in a weird way too, it's, if you've looked at like the pyramids, and there were these interesting initiations way back in the day with these pyramids. And not a lot of people made it through the initiation. In a lot of ways, the Poseidon Adventure is kind of like that, right? It's like the thing that you're supposed to do in the pyramid. If you do that thing, you're fucked, right? Like there's snakes there, or you go into a chamber and you're drowned. Like there's this, this story where this one person makes it and they get to the other side and they make it through this initiation. And then all of a sudden, the entire power of the universe is imbued into them, coming into their crown chakra and their third eye. Like there is that story, those stories about the initiations of the Great Pyramid. And so what they do in that is they go in a direction where you're not theoretically going to go. It is the road less traveled. What they're doing is Aquarian, right? Everything is saying, go this way, go this way, go this way. No, we are going to take the contrary route. We are going to ascend to the point where we will exit the upside down. Think about that for a second. That's what's happening. They're going in the opposite direction so that ultimately they will be liberated, right? And what happens when that hatch opens? The air comes in. The air is what? It's the sky. Ultimately, it's Aquarius. And it's the interzone between the world that's beneath the ocean and where they're coming from to this other world where they are greeted by the breath of spirit and liberation, right? So from where we are, Now, from where they did this, when they wrote the story, right, because the story was written prior to 1972, right? So in the Sterling Siliphant's mind, I think it's Donald Neame. I think that's the director, Neame or Near, what are the Neare or Neame? They're not thinking about where we are in 2025 in Pluto and Aquarius and how everything is inverted and it's the upside. They're not thinking about. They're writing this story, and it makes sense. Now there are these themes in the story, and these themes are religious and they are Piscean, and you're dealing with at least two of the Aramaic faiths. You got Christianity and Judaism, right? They're there. They're part of the narrative, which are Piscean in their formation, right? They're Piscean. And you again, right? You have these other religious themes going on. The two the two fathers, one fish going in one direction, one fish swimming the other direction. And then you have the fiery, rebellious Aquarian spirit of Gene Hackman, who plays Reverend Frank Scott, who is the contrarian. He's the one that's leading him in a different direction. This is the new gospel. And he's literally living it out, right? This is exactly what his character's about. Because if his character was the old gospel, he would have stayed in the ballroom with Arthur O'Connell, or he would have went with the other group. And there's an interesting scene where he says, listen, I'll be back in 15 minutes. And if I'm not back, then you go with the other group. So he's willing to surrender his position, but he makes it back, right? So again, from this Aquarian perspective, he's going in the opposite direction. He is going, they're saying, what? The engine room? What? What do you want to go there for? Well, they know. And I guess I suppose if you bring Eric Shea into it, this guy right here, and a child shall lead them. And he kind of does, right? That's the other side of this. Oh, and a child shall lead them. Well, who are they referring to in that? Of course, the child is the baby Jesus. But really, literally, Eric Shea knows how to get to the boiler room or where the engines are. So there's so many like Piscean threads in this movie. But then there's also the Aquarian thread. And again, from the meta perspective, it really does dovetail in a lot of ways with the passing of Gene Hackman and that moon that's balsamic in Aquarius. And then it moves into that balsamic Piscean phase. And then we discover Gene Hackman has passed away. Right. And it literally, it's not as if we're moving from Aquarius to Pisces or Pisces to Aquarius, but there's this commingling of both, right? There's this commingling of both. And it's a commingling of both with Hackman, obviously, holding down the Aquarian symbolism personification. But even when you look at the chart from Friday, when we had Pluto in Aquarius, conjunct Pallas, which was behind the sun, Pluto being occulted, and the planet, which represents literally the occult, with Scorpio being occulted behind the sun, and all these other planets sort of out in front. And which was the most out in front planet? It was Mars in what sign? Cancer. That's right. Mars in Cancer is the planet that was out in front of the crowd, right? The planetary parade. Okay, so let's play it back, right? Let's play this thing back because it's really fucking interesting. Really interesting. I'm going to put this back up here one more time because I don't know where it is. Let me see if I have it up here. Hold on. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. Right here, I'm going to share this. Right here. There's Hackman's Pluto at 18 degrees. The alignment goes direct. There's Mars. Now, we talked about this from the perspective of his passing, but think about this from the Poseidon Adventure. He is Mars as well, right? He's leading them, right? He's literally leading them out of the underworld and the bowels of that ship, even though the ship is flipped upside down, he's actually taking over the underworld. That's a different story altogether. And this is incredibly fascinating. Like, this is where the planets were, right there. And what are we doing? We're talking about this movie, the Poseidon Adventure, sort of after the fact. And I love a lot of Hackman's movies, but if there's one movie that really personifies this chart, and he may think it was just like, oh, that's just a work film, which is what he told Ben Stiller. No, he is the personification of Reverend Frank Scott. He is the rebel, unorthodox priest, right, who's going to shake his fist at God, right? Uranus and Aries, right there, sextiling his Aquarian sun, and Aries being action-oriented. He's the personification of it. Like, he is that role. And it's amazing how, and so, okay, the sun was at what degree? 12 degrees. It's about 8 degrees off of where the moon was. The moon was at 20 Pisces when, the moon was at 20 Pisces when the Poseidon Adventure launched onto silver screens. So to me, this is really fascinating that we're not just talking about a movie, we're talking about a model of reality. And we have been and are in the upside down. And what is the Poseidon Adventure saying? Saying, go in the opposite direction. Go in the opposite direction. Do not follow the crowd. Do not stand on orthodoxy. Don't wait for somebody to save you. This is what the movie is saying. And amidst all the pressure that they experience with their little party, and whether it's the people they encounter along the way, or the infighting and the bickering in their own party, there's a tremendous amount of pressure to turn around and go back, and to go the conventional way. And every time it happens, Gene Hackman stands up, right? And he kind of says, we got to go this way. We got to go this way. We have to go in a direction that you may not think is going to be the right one, but it will be. You have to have faith and trust in me and this process. It's a metaphor for where we are. The Poseidon Adventure is a meta. It's a meta. It's a meta for our current reality. That's the takeaway. Now, anything else with Gene Hackman, that's a different story. Again, I think it's kind of odd, right? Like when we break the name down, Gene Hackman, and we're kind of hanging out with Elon Musk and all the CRISPR technology and Neuralink and Jeffrey Epstein and the ranch and New Mexico and all the genetic modifications, that all of a sudden we have this famous actor who jumps out at us with the name Gene Hackman. Oh, and he's an Aquarian. Interesting. Now, the other movie, this is what I was going to bring up. The other movie that he, to me, he really personifies is Eddie Doyle and The French Connection. And The French Connection is about heroin, which is what? It is a Piscean drug. In fact, all drugs are Piscean. In that movie, he plays a cop who will do things that are unorthodox like his character, Frank Scott, in the Poseidon Adventure, where he breaks the rules. He breaks the rules, pushes the boundaries, but he gets the job done. Right? In The French Connection 2, which is actually a really good movie. Don't sleep on The French Connection 2. It's a really good movie. But in that movie, he gets captured, and they actually turn him into a giant. By the way, Eddie Doyle's a real person. Like, he's a real person. I think he wrote a book. And then they made a movie. There's 2 Eddie Doyle books. The other one's called The 7-Ups. And I think Roy Scheider, who plays Gene Hackman's partner in French Connection, is also in The 7-Ups. What's interesting about Hackman is the roles that he turned down. He turned down Robert Shaw's role in Jaws. He turned it down. He could have had that role, which would have been another Piscean movie, by the way, right? But another kind of 12th house movie. He also turned down, believe it or not, he turned down Richard Dreyfuss's role in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was offered that role. He turned it down. And then the other role he turned down was, and this one I don't know if I could see him in it, because I think Harrison Ford, I think, did a fair enough job. He turned down Indiana Jones. He was offered all 3 of those movies, right? All 3 of those movies, and all 3 of them are Spielberg projects. They're all 3 are Spielberg projects. So he could have been any one of those guys, but he didn't do it. He had other ideas about the movies he wanted to be. But The French Connection has to do with heroin and Pisces. And the other day I did a show. This is about a day before. I think it was the day before Gene Hackman's body was found, or 2 days before. I forget which. Time just kind of blurs. And I did this whole thing around sort of the replacement theory of Europe and all these migrations. And I started off historically in the 20th century with the 2 most recent waves of migration, which was the Turkish migration into Germany and the Algerian migration into France post-World War II. And one of the things that the Algerian migration leads to is the establishment of the heroin trade and distribution in Marseille, which is where a lot of Algerians would wind up landing. And I'm not saying all Algerians are part of the heroin trade, but that's where they matriculate. Now, Marseille has become a huge, huge Muslim community in France. But I started to talk about that, and I started to talk about the heroin trade in Marseille. And when I was thinking about it and talking about it, scenes from The French Connection were going through my brain. And then I think it was just a couple of days later they find Gene Hackman's body. So when these things happen and we start to talk about these things, like either here in a podcast or maybe in your own life or however, they'll pop up. And then now you're kind of swimming in this really interesting ocean of symbology. And sometimes it even happens before it happens, when you're kind of immersed in these symbolic and archetypal waters. And Gene Hackman is kind of a big figure right now in terms of our story, right? And just, again, it is the Poseidon Adventure. We are in the upside down. And the way out is the way that most people don't think it is. Because here we are in Pluto and Aquarius, where everything is inverted in a lot of ways. Well, not everything, but most things are inverted. And there is that road less traveled, contrarian spirit that is a part of our time. So something to think about here on a Sunday night as we discuss astrology and the Poseidon Adventure and Gene Hackman and all the stuff that goes along with it. If you like that, you like that breakdown, you might like my astrological readings. And you can inquire about them on my website, robertphoenix.com. For those of you who are wondering what's going on with my website, well, it feels like I went to an orphanage and I adopted a kid. Well, I picked out a theme. So I picked out a theme, and I'm going to be working with my web designer. So we're going to try to consolidate everything under one roof with robertphoenix.com, including live streaming. Fingers crossed. So if we ever get shut down again, I want the backup plan, and the backup plan is the website. So keep that in mind. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about this upcoming eclipse and the eclipses that are on their way. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to talk about it because next Sunday will be the 9th, and I won't be here. And then the Sunday after that's going to be the 16th, and it'll be after the fact. So I should probably do this now. And why don't we talk about this upcoming eclipse and the eclipses in general? Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so this is the eclipse on the 14th. And the current eclipse cycle that we're in culminates in 2027. And one of the things that I talked about on the webinar, or that's not even a webinar, it was just we'll call it a digital meetup, which is what we had over on Locals, was that every eclipse, as part of this eclipse cycle, with the exception on the one that is in September on the 21st, they're all lunar eclipses. These are all lunar eclipses, which is wild, right? So they're either going to be lunar eclipses with highlights in Pisces or Virgo. This first one on the 14th, the Ides, one day before the Ides of March, kicks it off in Virgo. So this is what it looks like. And it'll be visible here in most of North America in the early morning hours. So I'll show you what it looks like here. You'll get to see sort of the, hold on, eclipses. Hold on. Right here, eclipses 2024. You'll get to see 2025, what it looks like, where the eclipse is going to be. So I really like this website for eclipses. It's called timeanddate.com. It's very, very straightforward. And so here we go. We're looking at this partial lunar, that's the one on the 29th. That's not what I want. The next lunar eclipse, I want this one right here. Right here. So this is it right here. This is the total lunar eclipse, March 13th, 14th. So it's at 14, like the 14th at 1:28 a.m. So if you look at the map of the eclipse, which we'll bring up here, I'll show you. Whoops, let me just do this. Let's go zoom in. We're out. Let's see if we zoom out. You zoom out a little bit more. Okay. So there we go. All right. So this is what, let me stretch this out. This is what the eclipse, look, this is the major path of the eclipse. Right here. Right, that's where it starts. All right, let's keep going. Let's do this then. We'll fire it up. Hold on, come back. No. All right. No, we don't want Bismarck. No, we don't want to explore. No. Come on, where is it? Down here. No, it's back. There is a button. Here I am. I'm hyping this site. There's a button that allows us to see the eclipse. This is it. There's a live stream for it, but we don't really want that. Let's go back to the beginning. Hold on. Just need to make this a little bit smaller. One more. All right, so this is what it looks like. This is what I wanted to show you right here. Okay, animation. Here we go. So there's your eclipse right there. Right there. So if we follow it, let's start from the beginning. All the way back here. So it begins really right here. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is Europe right there. And this is kind of where things start to get sketchy. Am I right? Like, I think we have, there's Italy, that's the boot, right? So we're going to have some France, some Germany here. And then over here and here, we're going to start to get into Poland, the Ukraine. So we have the Balkans right here. So they're part of the story as well, right? But we're going to watch the eclipse in action. Here we go. There it is. And there it goes. All right. So it's going to cross North America. And what's interesting about this eclipse is the length of it. So it begins at the penumbral eclipse begins at 10:57 p.m. and then it hits maximum at 1:58 a.m. That is a long eclipse cycle, right? Long eclipse cycle. And then it hits full at 1:26 a.m. And then the full eclipse ends at 2:31 a.m. So it's in an eclipse mode for over an hour. And that's actually fairly long for an eclipse. So the length and the duration of this eclipse is interesting. And one could perhaps make a case that the effects of this eclipse might be longer lasting than perhaps other lunar eclipses. South Node in Virgo, looks like we're dealing with health issues here. And with the moon in the 10th house, it feels a bit like mania. You know, when the moon is in the 12th house, it's very like when we think of the moon in the 10th house as being almost related to the word lunacy, right? It's right here at the top of the chart. It's kind of on display for everybody to see. Like that's part of what's happening here. But it also feels, you know, when you think about like the moon in the 10th house, generally, it represents the unconscious. Even when it's full, right? It doesn't have to be new or balsamic or raining gibbous, whatever. The moon represents the unconscious. Now, what's weird is that when it's full, the light of the moon shines upon the moon. The light of the moon, or the moon is illuminated. So therefore our sky, the night sky, is much brighter than it normally is. And it feels like there's kind of more on the table, right? It's not that you know, dimly lit balsamic moon or that new moon, but it still nonetheless is the moon. And it brings with it this idea that there's a mystery, right? There's a theoretical, and even when we look at the moon, right? The moon doesn't fucking move. We only see one side. And, you know, we can sit here for another hour just talking about all the anomalies with the moon that make no fucking sense, right? So the moon is this really weird thing. And it occupies a really weird place in our lives in a lot of ways. And so here with this eclipse, it is front and center. It is in Virgo, where it's not the best place for the moon, let's be honest. Challenging moon. But it feels to me like there's something about this moon that is connected to hysteria, and it's related to health. And when you look at the eclipse, right, as it passes across the U.S., it's almost like the shadow of something kind of ominous, right? It's sort of like when they had the Ten Commandments, and the Israelites are painting blood above their door. It's like Passover, and this dark spirit comes in. If you don't have the thing in front of your door, it gets in underneath your door, right? And what does it do? It invades your lungs and literally suffocates the people who are not protected. Pass over this house, right? It kind of feels like that in some ways. And we're moving into this Easter territory here with this moon, and it's also very much connected to this idea of health. And I'm wondering when the bird flu or the measles thing or whatever kind of supposed zoonotic crisis that they're going to lay on us like an egg. Like, when is that happening? Because it's been part of the chatter for a while now, and I feel like if it's going to happen, it's going to be around this eclipse. That this is what we're going to be dealing with. And then down here at the bottom we have Saturn. And what is Saturn? Saturn is the authority. So, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to deal with it. I mean, there's some interesting things here in terms of the grand trine and the double kite pattern, where there's tends to be a bit of a better flow maybe than perhaps with other eclipses. Like, I love the pattern here. We've got these two double kites, right? And this is pretty much a classic splay chart right here. Your classic splay chart. More to do with conjunctions and oppositions, but every now and then get your occasional square. There's something here about this eclipse that doesn't sit right with me in terms of this hysteria or manic idea around health. And again, when we deal with like the time of year and the light of this full moon, because this next phase, this moon is going to be new, and it's going to be in Aries, and we're going to be dealing with spring energies. And the spring energies, again, we're starting to have this dialogue about the egg, and the egg, which is the source of all life. And what have we seen with the egg? The egg has been, under fire. These chickens have been, killed. I mean, I don't know, millions of chickens. Is that what we're talking about here? And the ones that aren't killed are getting hit with this bird flu mRNA thing. I mean, there's a whole other narrative to this, right? And so what's going to transpire? So all these birds that are going to get the mRNA, how are they going to do? Are they all of a sudden going to be even more sick? I mean, these are all questions that are now floating around through our heads because, hey, we've been here before. We know what this story looks like. We know what the stay at home for two weeks to slow the curve. We know what that looks like. So what are we dealing with here, right? Are we going to be dealing with the effects of all of these, quote unquote, immunized birds versus the euthanized birds? Is that what's going to hatch around this full moon, right? And this in conjunct with Chiron down here in Aries. Ooh. It's an interesting full moon. Very interesting. And the other thing too is the Pope. The Pope. We looked at the Pope's chart yesterday, and shout out to my guy Slick Dissident, who was I was on Steve's show last week, Zerlith the Immortal, who I think might still be in chat. And we talked about the Pope. Now, Slick says he thinks the Pope is going on the 14th. And I was looking at the new moon, and I thought, oh man, that moon's going to be right between Saturn and the sun. I think there's a real possibility. Well, I think this is an interesting day to look at with the Pope here. We actually looked at his chart yesterday, and that could also be very much literally and figuratively in the air. So this is the first of the eclipses that set up the eclipse cycle between the nodes in Pisces and Virgo until 2027. This is the first one. This is, I think it's the what do they call this? The worm moon? Isn't that what they call this upcoming moon? The worm moon, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is going to be setting the tone for the eclipse cycle that we're about to start to become initiated in, right? So keep your eyes on what's taking place before the eclipse, 3, 4, or 5 days before the eclipse. We get into that shadow period, right? What is that, about a week and a half before, and a week and a half after. So we have this 3-week cycle that we're really looking at before and after with this eclipse. So that would be what we're almost there now, right? We're almost there now. So by the time we get to Wednesday, I think we can start to kind of look out there and start to get our cosmic feedback loop for what's coming. And then again, after that, about a week, this is about a 3-week window really for the eclipse. So I feel like this one is big. It sets the tone for what we're dealing with for the entirety of this eclipse cycle. And I do think it has to do with health. And I do think it has to do with whether or not we're going to be able to make our own decisions around this. And last time we went through this, we really had to fight, right? We really had to fight tooth and nail to make sure that we weren't sucked up in this black hole of propaganda and mind control. And a lot of you, I commend you. You chose the right path. And no, you said. I wonder, if when we're looking at this eclipse as a harbinger of what's to come, I wonder if we'll be able to dig our heels in the sand and make those choices that we made last time. It's going to be very interesting to watch. So keep your eye. Let's start looking around on Wednesday. This Wednesday gets us kind of in that week and a half zone, right? So let's start to have that sense, right? Get your Pallas Athena out, your pattern recognition, and start to look around starting on Wednesday. I'm going with health. I'm going with the health issues. That's what I'm looking at here. But I also feel like in some ways we can deal with this. Like there's a lot of really good things happening this eclipse. It's not just fated or doomed, but there are some things that are pretty intense, right? And how do we resolve this with the moon Saturn opposition? Saturn's the authority. Right? Saturn is where we're going to do it this way. 10 days to stop the spread. Typically, when you get into a Saturn-Moon opposition in a chart, in many cases, the person who has that Saturn-Moon opposition, those are divorced parents, right? And that's the divide between Saturn. And unfortunately for people, like you can have a divorce situation in your life and not have a Saturn-Moon opposition. But the people who do have the Saturn moon opposition, which is indicative of a divorce, and even if it's not a divorce, it represents the mother and the father who are inside of their life, but they're not very close, right? They're polar opposite people. And usually the person that has that Saturn moon opposition, they play the role of the mediator between Saturn and the moon, the mother and the father, which is not always fun, right? It's just not real fun, but it turns out to be that way. So we are seeing this Saturn moon opposition, right? And I'm not saying that if you're in a marriage, you're automatically going to get divorced. But there is something about this which is indicative of a divorce from some degree of tradition, right? Like when you get into Pisces, like again, when we looked at with the Poseidon Adventure and all the things that Pisces is related to, the historical tradition of religion and the Abrahamic faiths, right? And sacrifice and all the things that are part of that tradition. It seems to me that with this moon in opposition with Saturn, there's a divorce from that tradition. Also, it feels in a different, well, maybe related, but it feels a lot like there's a major, I wouldn't say it's a rejection, but there's a major separation of people who are not aligned with what I would call perhaps a more Saturnian or masculine way. And let me give you an example. This will get us into the next phase really nicely. All right, so we just saw something on Friday, which was kind of mind-blowing, right? We saw J.D. Vance, we saw Donald Trump, we saw Volodymyr Zelensky. And one of the things that happened, and look, you can think that it was all just a put on or it was staged or whatever, right? Like, I don't really think so. I don't think it went down like that. And a lot of people will say, well, they videotaped it. Well, guess what? Well, they videotaped Keir Starmer, they videotaped Macron, right? And nobody said that those things were staged. You know, when Keir Starmer basically told J.D. Vance, we've always supported free speech, and we'll support free speech from now until the day the English flag sets, or whatever the fuck he said, right? It didn't become an argument. Like J.D. Vance brought it up. He's like, well, you know, you're kind of running the show over there. Like Vance and Trump have this good cop, bad cop thing down now. Trump's a good cop. Vance is the bad cop. But when he brought it up, Keir Starmer responded to him. And that was it. Like J.D. Vance didn't decide to make it a big deal, right? In essence, he didn't become Zelensky. He let it sit. That's what he did. He let it sit. He brought it up and he let it sit. Now, did people say, well, that was staged? Because guess what? He had to put J.D. Vance in his place. Or did they say it was staged when Macron told Trump, well, we're getting paid back? Like, nobody really talked about those things being staged, or maybe some did, but not a lot. But now, Friday, oh man, that's all theatrics. Oh, they all have IMDb pages. Well, just because you have an IMDb page doesn't mean that you are a complete actor. It's one of these little things that's happened now when people are trying to find something that they want to pin onto another person and say, well, here's a rabbit hole and here's a conspiracy and this is why this is happening and how it's happened and why this person is culpable. Doesn't always work that way. So I believe, this is my belief, and you may not share my belief, and that's okay. My belief is that they had a press conference My belief was that they had a loose plan, and the loose plan was that if Zelensky was not going to play ball, then J.D. Vance was going to do a Keir Starmer to him. I believe that was the plan. Now, all Zelensky had to do was just say, okay, I will be happy to negotiate with you and JD, and we'll talk about this. And I really appreciate you and the American people. And like all that's all the little shit had to do. That's all he had to do. But did he do it? No, he didn't do it. He was going to be a front of opposition. Now, apparently, this is only what I've heard, but apparently he met with other people in Washington, like Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer and all these other people who have supported, would you call it his effort? I wouldn't call it his effort, but supported his scam and said, look, just don't agree with what Trump is going to bring to you, okay? We got this covered. We got your back. We're going to make sure you get everything you need, and we'll keep the money flowing, right? And they probably told him that. This is what I've heard. And then this thing happens. And I do think that when it started to break down that was real, I don't believe it was fake, right? And there's a guy who I was watching. He's one of these body language guys, but he's also a forensic psychologist. So it's not just, a hobby for this dude, right? He makes like really, really salient points, and it's only points that can be arrived at by people who are not acting. Because when you act, there's a stiffness. Like if they were acting, they should get fucking Oscars. They should just get Oscars, because the way that the body language unfolds is all part of the timing, right? All right, so why am I bringing this up? Well, there were two factions that saw that, perceived and reacted. One faction, I believe, was very emotional. Right, it was very emotional, which was scolding Trump, scolding America, right? Very, very emotional. Oh, we don't do that. We don't do that. Very emotional. And then there's another faction, which wasn't really emotional, which was like, this guy's a piece of shit. He's been extending this war. He doesn't want a ceasefire. He's an Aquarian, so he's going to be a bit rebellious in his own mode right there, right? This is not a knock on Aquarians. Look, I just gave Aquarius a lot of love with Gene Hackman. So don't accuse me of hating on Aquarians, although I'm going to hate on this little Aquarian for a minute. Okay, so he's going to be, kind of a runny-nosed, fucking, a Coke runny-nosed contrarian in that moment, right? In that moment. And then that's what I think is happening. He's being a fucking little contrarian bitch. And he doesn't want peace. He doesn't want to be the guy that says, okay, I'll give you the Donbass. I'll take this and it'll be good. And thank you so much, President Trump. Like, he's not going to be that. He doesn't want to be that guy. He wants to be the guy in the statue, right? He's a little shit. He's what, maybe 5'5"? Like his feet barely touch the ground on the chair. And it's like, that's how I see that guy. And frankly, I'm tired of him. I'm tired of him, and I'm tired of that war. It's a bullshit war, and they've spent billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of theoretically your taxpayer dollars, what you had, what you don't have, and send it to fucking Ukraine. Okay? where all this money laundering is going on. It's going back to Biden and Hunter Biden, and it's going back to Joe Bankman-Fried, and I mean, really, that was all happening. He set that whole thing up with Zelensky to put that money back into his FTX token. I mean, this thing is fucking deep and corrupt, and I think we're all fucking over it. Okay, we're all over it. So then you have Trump and you have Vance. And by the way, both of those guys, they don't care what other people think. And there are other people who saw what would happen. Oh, that's such a bad look for America. Oh my God, this is terrible. We've never seen anything like this. It was so coarse. It was so crude. It's like, excuse me? Really? It's like people wanted transparency. You had a transparent moment there. You may not think it was. I do think it was a transparent moment. Whether it was like, okay, JD, if he gets out of line, hit him, right? Yeah, is that in there? Probably. But you saw something that was very transparent. And you saw Trump, who was like, fuck you. You think you've got the cards? You have no cards. You saw somebody who was in the midst of a negotiation, and he was getting heavy. If you watch this guy, I'll see if I can put the link in. This guy basically, when Trump finally hits him, right, he reads Zelensky's body language, and Zelensky's body language has been defiant all the way up to that point. And at that point, he begins to relent because Zelensky understands that in that moment, he's not going to get what he wants. It's really, really fascinating. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is the separation I'm talking about, right? Now, the moon in Virgo is feminine. Nothing wrong being feminine. We all have our feminine sides. I got my feminine side. I like to cook. I got my feminine side. I like to cook, I like to water the plants every now and then. I work with people in an intuitive way. We all have our feminine sides, right? Nothing wrong with that. When the moon, when Regulus went into Virgo, right there in 2011, everything started to get a lot more feminine. Let me just be real upfront about it. And so we have Regulus that's at 0 Virgo now, which is very feminine. So when we see this, what are we seeing? We're seeing the separation from double masculine. Saturn is masculine. I don't care if it represents Capricorn, which is a feminine sign. Saturn is masculine. The sun is masculine. And so we have this opposition between Saturn and the sun, Saturn, and the moon. It is the separation in a dialectic sense from an overly emotional moon in Virgo, which can be emotional and critical, with Sun Saturn, which is the law. This is the way it's going to go down. And I feel like the trigger event was Friday, when this whole thing went down with Vance and it was really Vance first, Vance and Zelensky, and then Trump gets in, right? And then we see this division where some people are like, oh my God, I can't believe it. That's so horrible. We've never seen anything like this before. And then there are others people like, well, it's about fucking time somebody put that little shit in his place, right? And that was the trigger. And we're going to see more of this now, right? And it's not like Orange Man Bad or TDS or America is this, big oafish, brutish, adolescent child who's no longer getting its way in the world anymore, right? No, it's more about the separation of people who are going to be overly emotional, overly critical through their emotions, and other people who are going to, I wouldn't say resigned, but other people who are evolving towards a point of view which has a lot less patience for that. So this is this divide that this eclipse is really going to typify and personify. And I think that there is a beautiful and divine feminine, right? Like when I think of God, I think of God as masculine and feminine. How could you not? Right? How could you not think of God as masculine and feminine? It's the creation, right? So it's the mother and father, mother, father, God. So for me, there's no distinction between the two. However, there are some people who are going to be sort of more masculine in that personification, right? Oh, yeah, Father God, Yahweh, Sky God, whatever. But I feel like this eclipse begins to widen that gap, right? It's the beginning of this cycle where we start to get a divorce. You say, well, a divorce has happened already. Well, no, it hasn't happened already. We've been talking about it. We've been talking about it. We just can't get along with these people anymore, right? No fault divorce. We can't get along with them. Like it's been happening. It's been, it's like, sleeping in separate beds, but it's not a divorce. This eclipse, to me, represents the beginning of that divorce. And it doesn't have anything to do with the Mason-Dixon line or the left or the right or the north or the south. It has to do with a type of pragmatism versus a type of emotional extreme that might be well-meaning with Virgo. It might be very well-meaning in Virgo, but let me tell you, this is an axis here, and it begins something. It doesn't just happen. I mean, we're kind of already in it. We saw it yesterday or Friday, where people were like very emotional about what happened with Friday. Oh, we can't ever have that again. Oh, it's terrible. And there were other people like, fuck, it's how you do business, for better or worse. Now, is one better than the other? Well, that's for you to decide, because you're going to weigh in somewhere on this. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle over here. Maybe you're Jupiter and Gemini. You're sort of holding it on the front. Well, yeah, I can see both sides of this. And maybe that's where it's at. But this is what I think this eclipse is about. It's the beginning of this divorce that has been brewing for a while. It's like, okay, you go your way, we go our way. And it's not going to just happen then, but it's going to be a theme here across these eclipses through 2027. Now, there's another side of it all, with Pisces and the, we'd say that Pisces is in the dominant position with the true node in Pisces, right? Let go, let God, surrender, forgive, go with the flow. Like all those things are a part of Pisces. It's like, oh, yeah, I can dig it. Yeah. Why do we have to get caught up in all these ugly little details here with Virgo? It's just so nitpicky and so analytical. We want to be in control all the time. And in Pisces, man, we don't have to be in control. We can let Jesus take the wheel. Jesus take the wheel for a while. I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to catch a few, like, just moments of rest. I'm going to just close my eyes while you take the wheel, right? That's the true node in Pisces. But guess what? When you get up, Jesus still at the wheel, you're still there. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to get out a map. Hey, Jesus, I got a map here. Don't worry, I got you covered. No, seriously. The thing with Virgo is that you got to take care of your basics and your fundamentals, right? This is what we talked about yesterday. The South Node in Virgo, if you want to get through this time, right, where everything is sort of oceanic and Piscean, right? We're up here in the wave and then we're down here in the wave. We're up here in the wave and we're down here in the wave, right? You got Pluto and Aquarius in the background and everything is inverted and we're in the upside down. And if you want to go to the exit, you go to the place where you're not supposed to go, to the engine room and not the bow. You got all those things, but guess what? You still got to stay healthy. You still have to stay healthy. And that's where Virgo comes into play right there. So it's not just that the South Node is going to be, oh, we're all just going to be shown just, how neurotic we really are with that South Node in Virgo. Yeah, there may be some of that, but it's also there for a reason. It's a reminder to take care of basics and to make sure that you are taking care of your body and your health. Now, will there be some assholes who will come along and make you question all of that? Perhaps even threaten it? Perhaps even as soon as after this first eclipse? Well, I guess we'll find out. In which case, then you're really going to have to figure out how to take care of yourself. All right. That's it for now. Thank you for being here. We went for a long time, 3 hours. That's about right, 3 hours. So thank you. If you were here and you're here through the entire show, I appreciate that. I appreciate you for being here. Everybody who has purchased me a cup of coffee, thank you. I appreciate that. And if you feel like you want to contribute to the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee there over on, there's a link over there. Buy me a cup of coffee. Since I am not monetized, you cannot do super chats here. If you did, that'd be great, but you can't because I'm not. Mods, thank you again for doing what you do. I don't know what was going on in chat, but I'm sure you were doing your thing over there. Chattaria, you're the best. I keep coming back to this. It was really interesting. Somebody left a comment in the show on Friday and basically insulted the chat and said that this chat was a toilet bowl, that Americans were, it's like, fuck that. Fuck that. I responded to it, but I have met a lot of you in person, and I've met even more of you online, and you're some of the finest people I've ever come across. Really, really good people, and people who maybe a little bit eccentric or quirky or opinionated, and that's okay. But in your core, this is a very fine group comprised of people who really do care. And a lot of the folks in this group had their lives smashed and their hearts broken during COVID. And they had to go through that and walk through that fire and hold it together while their family members were jumping ship. And I know so many stories about this because people have shared it with me, right? So for somebody to come in and to say that this group is basically filled with ugly toilet bowl Americans, I have one word for you, and it's this right here, right there. Now, I'm the ugly American, but I don't care at this point because I have come in contact with a lot of people, and they're fine, fine people. So until you've sat down and you have sat across from somebody in this group or in this chat or watches this show, right, keep your mouth shut. Take it somewhere else. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. God bless. Take care of each other. Love you all. Have a great, great, great Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday with the astro weather. Bye for now.